August 26, 1346, northern France. A hillside near the village of Crécy en Ponthieu. King Edward III of England positions 8,000 men, longbowmen, dismounted knights, Welsh spearmen, on a slope overlooking the Vallée aux Clairs. Philip VI of France commands somewhere between 25,000 and 40,000. The chronicles argue the count, but the outcome doesn't. By sunset, French nobility lies stacked in the mud. This is the story of how range, discipline, and a rainstorm broke the age of mounted chivalry. Summoned every able knight and chased. Edward needed a crossing over the Somme. His scouts found the ford at Blanchetaque, 12 miles wide at low tide, defended by 3,500 French under Godemar de Fay. Dawn, August 24th. English archers waded chest deep, loosed into the defenders from 50 yards, cleared the far bank. Dufay pulled back. Edward crossed with his entire army in 6 hours, lost fewer than 200 men, and marched northeast. Philip, furious, arrived at the ford too late, took the bridge at Abbeville and closed the gap. Perspective and casualty estimates, and the accounts of Jean Froissart, compiled between 1369 and 1400, cross-referenced with the Crécy rolls listing English troop deployments, and the chronicles of Giovanni Villani, the Florentine banker present in Philip's camp, who recorded Genoese contract terms and payment disputes. Now back to the information. He deployed in 3 divisions. Right wing, Edward, Prince of Wales, 16 years old, called the Black Prince for his armor, commands 800 men-at-arms and 2,000 archers under the Earl of Warwick and Sir John Chandos. Center, the Earl of Northampton leads another 800 knights and 2,000 longbowmen. Left flank, Edward himself holds the reserve with 700 dismounted cavalry and 2,000 more archers. Total English strength, around 2,000 knights, 6,000 to 7,000 longbowmen, 1,000 Welsh spearmen. Knights dismount, plant their standards, stand in 3 tight blocks. Archers deploy in wedge formations, called harrows, on the wings and forward slopes, stakes hammered into the earth at 45 degrees to break cavalry. The baggage train forms a wagon logger at the rear. Arrow, 30 inches, ash or poplar shaft, steel bodkin point, goose feather fletching. A trained archer, required by English law since 1252 under pain of fine to practice every Sunday after church, looses 10 to 12 aimed shots per minute. Effective range, 250 yards. Killing range against unarmored horses and men, 200 yards. Against plate, still lethal at 100 yards if the angle is right. Each archer carries 2 sheaves, 48 arrows total. Reserves rest in wagons. The bodkin punches mail, finds gaps in plate at the joints, armpit, neck, groin. French knights wear full harness, Milan-forged steel, but their horses wear comparatively little barding. Crushed, metal, mud. The vanguard, King John of Bohemia, blind since 1336 at the siege of Vilnius, rides tied between 2 knights. Count Charles II of Alençon commands the main cavalry. Philip's brother, Charles, Count of Alençon, leads another division. The Duke of Lorraine, the Count of Flanders, the Count of Blois, counts, dukes, bannermen, more than 500 knights of the highest blood. Behind them, 6,000 Genoese crossbowmen under Carlo Grimaldi and Ottone Doria, hired for 40,000 florins, contracted in Genoa earlier that year. Chronicles say 15,000 additional foot soldiers, men-at-arms, Flemish militia. Total French force, between 25,000 and 40,000, depending on whether you trust Villani's Italian ledger or Froissart's drama. They've ridden all day, they see the enemy, honor demands attack. The constable tries to halt them. Chaos. Philip gives in, orders advance. It's 4 in the afternoon. Storm clouds gather. A summer cloud burst, maybe 10 minutes, soaks the ridge. Genoese crossbow strings are hemp or linen. They stretch when wet, lose tension, lose range. Longbow strings are waxed linen or hemp, but English archers unstring them, tuck strings under helmets or inside leather cases. Wait. Rain stops. Genoese advance again, 150 yards out. They loose. Bolts fall short, stick in the mud. English archers step forward, string bows in seconds, draw. 6,000 arrows rise, black against the gray sky, arc, fall. Longbowmen loose in volleys, not individual shots. 6,000 archers, 10 arrows per minute sustained, 60,000 arrows in the air every minute. The math is simple. Horses scream, rear, throw riders. Knights in full plate hit the ground, can't rise in the mud. It takes 2 men to lift a downed knight. Wounded horses bolt sideways, crash into other horses, tangle formations. Arrows hit visors, necks, the joints at elbows and knees. Welsh spearmen dart forward, drag knights from saddles, drive daggers through visors into eyes. The slope becomes a killing floor. Wave 3. The Count of Flanders charges, dies within sight of the English line, arrow through the throat. Wave 4. The Duke of Lorraine, same. Centre de Recherche Archéologique du Pontieu in 1985 and 2001, which recovered over 200 arrow points, horse bones showing penetration trauma, and fragments of Italian-made crossbow prods at the base of the slope, alongside forensic analysis of longbow skeletal markers, overdeveloped left arms and shoulder asymmetry, found in mass graves at Towton and Wisby that match Crécy period archer remains. Now back to the information. King John of Bohemia. Blind, 50 years old. Hears the battle, demands to be led forward. His knights tie their reins together, charge. John's motto? Ich dien, I serve. They reach the melee, fight surrounded, all die. John's body is found the next morning, still tied to his knights, his crest, 3 ostrich feathers, later adopted by the Black Prince as his own. Froissart writes, "The blind king struck about him bravely with his sword. The account doesn't say how many blows landed." Or Edward asks, "Is my son dead, unhorsed, or so wounded he cannot fight?" "No, sire, but he is in a fierce engagement." Edward replies, "Return to those who sent you and tell them not to send for me again as long as my son is alive. Let the boy win his spurs." The prince holds, no reserves move. The Oriflamme is lost. Bodies cover the slope 3 deep in places. Morning count, August 27th. French dead include 1,142 knights and squires of noble birth, recorded by name in the rolls. Among them, King John of Bohemia, Charles of Alençon, the Duke of Lorraine, the Count of Flanders, the Count of Blois, the Count of Auxerre, the Count of Sancerre, the Grand Prior of France, the Archbishop of Rouen. Total French dead, including infantry and Genoese. Estimates range from 4,000 to 12,000. English casualties, between 40 and 300, depending on the chronicle. Villani says 40. Froissart says very few. The Grandes Chroniques admit less than 100. The disparity is obscene. French cavalry had to cross 300 yards of open slope under continuous arrowfall. Second, terrain. Uphill charge, muddy ground after rain, obstacles, stakes, wagon debris, bodies, brake momentum. Horses won't charge into solid obstacles. They shy, turn, collide. Third, discipline. English knights dismounted, held position, didn't chase glory. French knights charged piecemeal, no coordination, each division trying to reach the enemy first for honor. No combined arms, no tactical control. After Crécy, French military theorists spend the next decade trying to counter them. Heavier horse armor, Pavese shields, zigzag advances, night attacks. None work consistently. The burghers of Calais walk out barefoot with nooses around their necks. Queen Philippa begs Edward to spare them, he agrees. Calais becomes an English stronghold for 211 years. Post, unearthed bones, rusted mail, and a corroded sword pommel with the arms of Alençon. In 1985, the Centre de Recherche Archéologique du Pontieu conducted a survey, found arrow concentrations, marking the Genoese position and the base of the French charges, counted bodkin points versus broadheads. Bodkins dominate 9-1, meaning archers were shooting for armor penetration, not hunting. In 2001, ground-penetrating radar identified 3 large anomalies consistent with burial pits holding 200 to 400 bodies each, located 150 meters downslope from the English line, right where the chronicles say the French knights died. No excavation was authorized. French cultural law protects war graves. The pits remain. From Paris, dated 1343 to 1346, wrapped in a piece of Italian silk, likely dropped or buried by a Genoese crossbowman fleeing the field. The silk matches Genoese trade goods. The coins match the contracted payment. It's in the Musée de Picardie in Amiens now. Catalog reference MP 1923-47. Value in 1346. Enough to buy a small farm or pay a skilled mason for a year. Value now, the proof that men fought for silver, not just honor, and some didn't live to collect. The battle didn't end the age of knights. That took another century. But it taught Europe a lesson. Reach kills, discipline wins, and noble blood soaks into mud the same as any other. Crowns. Edward of Woodstock, the Black Prince, became the model of chivalric glory despite fighting dismounted like common infantry. The longbow remained England's primary weapon until the 1590s, when arquebuses finally replaced it. Not because guns were better, but because training a musketeer took weeks and training a longbowman took a lifetime, starting at age 7, building the bone and muscle memory that left marks on skeletons we still dig. Up. That's record. Discipline. English stood ground despite pressure. French charged piecemeal. Numbers, roughly 8,000 English versus 25,000 to 40,000 French. Casualties, 40 to 300 English, 4,000 to 12,000 French, including 1,542 named nobles. Duration, 4 hours, late afternoon to sunset, August 26, 1346. Wet hemp stretches, loses tension. A crossbow with slack string can't generate the force to drive a bolt through mail at 150 yards. English archers kept their strings dry, restrung in seconds, had the range advantage. When the Genoese turned and ran, French knights rode them down, literally trampled their own hired troops, because retreating in sight of the enemy was considered dishonorable, and blocking the path of knights was worse. Grimaldi died there, not from English arrows but from French hooves, and his family in Genoa filed a complaint with Philip's court in 1347 demanding payment for breach of contract. The court records survive. Archivio di Stato di Genova, Notai Antici, Filza 342. Philip settled for half the contracted sum. Each division attacked as soon as it reached the field. No coordination, no pause to form a single massed assault. Each wave thought it could break the English line where the previous one failed. Each wave rode into the same killing ground. 300 yards of open slope, arrow fall from 200 yards out, stakes at 50 yards, dismounted English knights with poleaxes and swords at contact. Horses don't charge into obstacles. They veer, stumble, throw riders. A knight in full plate, thrown into mud, can't stand without help. Mail and plate together weigh 60 to 80 pounds, distributed over the body, but enough to pin a man face down if he falls wrong. Welsh spearmen knew this, waited for downed knights, flipped them over, drove daggers through visor slits. Efficient, brutal, documented. His division held the right wing, took the heaviest pressure because the French naturally attacked the nearest English formation. Warwick and Chandos commanded the knights. The prince, 16, fought in the front rank. When the messenger rode to Edward requesting aid, the king's refusal wasn't cruelty, it was calculated. Sending reserves would signal weakness, might encourage more French attacks. Holding reserves kept them as a threat, forced the French to consider that fresh English troops could counterattack if they broke through. The prince's division held barely, the reserve never moved. The boy won his spurs, literally. Edward knighted him on the field the next morning. Froissart milks it for chivalric tragedy, but the practical details are darker. John was blind from an infection, possibly trachoma, contracted during a Lithuanian campaign. He couldn't rule effectively, had been sidelined politically, sought glory in combat to restore his name. His knights tied their reins together so they couldn't be separated in the melee, rode forward in a tight knot, were surrounded and cut down. John's body, found the next morning, had multiple wounds. Arrows, sword cuts, a crushed skull from a poleaxe or mace. He didn't die cleanly. The ostrich feathers, his personal crest, were taken by the Black Prince as a trophy and became the emblem of the Prince of Wales, used to this day. The motto, Ich dien, went with them. John's body was returned to Luxembourg for burial. His tomb is in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Luxembourg City. The arrow counts are staggering. 6,000 archers, 10 arrows per minute, sustained for 4 hours. That's to 60,000 arrows per minute, 3.6 million total. Obviously, not every archer shot continuously. Rates slowed during French withdrawals, sped up during charges, but even at half that rate, over 1 million arrows were loosed. Archaeological surveys found concentrations of 200-plus arrow points in small areas at the base of the slope, suggesting saturation shooting at mass targets. The bodkin to broadhead ratio, 9-to-1, indicates archers chose armor-piercing heads over hunting heads, meaning they expected armored targets. Bodkins don't expand on impact. They punch through mail links and find gaps in plate. Against unarmored horses, they're devastating. Horse bones recovered show penetration wounds to the chest, neck, and legs. Wounds that would drop a horse in seconds. The mud is understated in most retellings, but it mattered. The rainstorm, 10 to 15 minutes, turned the slope into slick ground. Knights in plate, horses in partial barding charging uphill. Traction is everything. Horses slip, stumble, collide. A horse that falls can't rise quickly. A knight thrown can't remount under arrow fire. The French lost momentum before they reached the English line, not because of fear, but because of physics. Mud plus slope plus obstacles equals chaos. The English, standing still on prepared ground, didn't have to move. They just had to hold and shoot. Shut, and hoping infection didn't set in. Philip's jaw never healed properly. He couldn't eat solid food for months. The oriflamme, lost on the field, was never recovered. It had flown at every major French battle since 1124, its red silk symbolizing no quarter given. Losing it was a political disaster as much as a military one. Philip commissioned a replacement in 1347, but the psychological damage was done. The burial process after Crécy is documented sparsely. English dead, 40 to 300 depending on the source, were buried in a mass grave near the windmill, marked with a wooden cross. French nobles were identified by their heraldry, laid out in the village church, buried individually or in small groups. The lower-ranked dead, men-at-arms, infantry, Genoese, were piled in pits and covered. Local clergy recorded some names, but most are lost. The 1850 discovery of bones in Alençon's sword pommel suggests one pit was near the mill. The 1985 and 2001 surveys suggest others downslope. No comprehensive excavation has been done, so the exact count remains unknown. Ground-penetrating radar shows the anomalies, but French law and local sentiment prevent digging. The dead stay buried. French commanders after 1346 knew longbows were deadly, but struggled to counter them. Heavy cavalry was the cornerstone of French military culture. Dismounting knights felt like surrender. At Poitiers, in 1356, the French tried a combined approach. Some knights dismounted, some stayed mounted, crossbowmen in front, and lost again, worse. King John II of France was captured, ransomed for 3 million gold crowns, bankrupting the treasury. At Agincourt in 1415, the French tried a fully dismounted assault and still lost, because the English repeated the Crécy playbook. Archers on the flanks, stakes forward, muddy ground, disciplined holding. The lesson wasn't don't charge longbows, it was don't fight on English terms. But French military pride made learning that lesson take decades. Guns replaced it, not because guns were more effective. Early firearms were inaccurate, slow, unreliable, but because guns required less training. A longbowman started training at age 7, practiced for years to develop the draw strength and accuracy needed for battlefield effectiveness. Skeletons of medieval archers show characteristic deformities, overdeveloped left arms, enlarged shoulder joints, bone spurs on the left elbow. A musketeer could be trained in weeks. By the 1590s, English military manuals stopped listing archery requirements. The longbow became a historical curiosity, remembered mainly for Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt, the 3 battles that killed French chivalry and established English military dominance for a century. It's a tourist site now, marked with a plaque. The field itself is private farmland plowed every year, sown with wheat and barley. No monuments mark the exact positions of the English line or the French charges. In 1346, the village of Crécy-en-Ponthieu had fewer than 200 residents. Today it has about 1/500. The battle is its claim to history, but the land doesn't remember. Plow blades turn up the occasional rusted arrow point or piece of mail, usually corroded beyond use, occasionally kept by farmers or donated to local museums. The Musée de Picardie in Amiens has a small collection. Arrow points, crossbow bolt heads, pieces of plate, a crushed helmet, the 1923 coin hoard. The objects are mundane, tools of war, not treasures, but they're the physical proof of what happened. The strategic impact of Crécy extended beyond the battlefield. Edward's victory forced Philip to the negotiating table temporarily. English control of the Channel solidified. The 100 Years' War, which had simmered since 1337 over Edward's claim to the French throne through his mother, Isabella, escalated into open warfare. Crécy proved English armies could defeat larger French forces if terrain and tactics favored them. The 11-month siege of Calais, 1346 to 1347, drained French resources and gave England a permanent foothold on the continent. Calais didn't fall to France again until 1558, when Mary I of England lost it, reportedly saying, "When I am dead, you will find Calais written on my heart." When fighting resumed, the English advantage held. French armies avoided open battle, preferred sieges and raids, tried to starve English garrisons out. The Treaty of Bretigny in 1360 forced France to cede huge territories, Aquitaine, Calais, Ponthieu, and pay 3 million gold crowns for King John's ransom. France didn't recover militarily until the 1370s, when commanders like Bertrand du Guesclin adopted guerrilla tactics, avoided pitched battles, and reclaimed territory slowly. The lesson of Crécy was finally learned. Don't fight the English on ground they choose. The longbow became a symbol of English identity, required by law, celebrated in ballads and poems. Robin Hood, a figure who predates Crécy but becomes popular in the 14th century, is always an archer, never a knight. The weapon of the commons becomes the weapon of legend. At Crécy, the conditions were wrong. Uphill, soaked strings, no pavis shields to reload behind, and trampled by their own employers when they retreated. Grimaldi and Doria, the Genoese commanders, both died on the field. Grimaldi killed by French cavalry, Doria by English arrows. Genoa didn't send troops to France again for decades. The lesson for mercenaries was clear. Contracts are void if your employer sacrifices you for honor. The political fallout in France was severe. Philip lost prestige, his nobles questioned his leadership, and the Estates General, France's assembly, demanded reforms and accountability. Philip resisted, but the military failures weakened his authority. When he died in 1350, his son John II inherited a fractured realm and continued the war with no better results. The French monarchy didn't stabilize until Charles V took the throne in 1364 and hired professional commanders instead of relying on feudal levies. By then, the 100 Years' War had become a generational conflict, and Crécy was just the first in a series of humiliations. At sea, longbows were less useful. Crossbows reloaded easier on a moving deck. In sieges, crossbows had better range and power for shooting from walls. In open field battles against light cavalry or infantry, longbows dominated. Against heavy cavalry on flat ground, outcomes varied. Momentum could carry knights through arrow fire if they closed quickly. Crécy worked because the English had time to prepare the ground, choose the terrain, and force the French to attack uphill into prepared defenses. Agincourt repeated the formula. Poitiers was messier. The French almost won, but English archers again decided the outcome. Village greens had archery butts. Sheriffs enforced practice laws. Boys started at 7 or 8, shooting lighter bows, building strength. By 15, a boy could draw a 60-pound bow. By 20, 100 pounds. By 30, 120 to 150 pounds. The skeletal changes, enlarged left humerus, asymmetric shoulders, were permanent. A professional archer's body was shaped by his weapon. When the English crown needed archers for war, it could call up thousands of trained men. No other European nation had this system. The longbow was England's strategic advantage, and Crécy proved it. Crossbows were acceptable. They required less strength, could be learned faster, and Italian and Genoese professionals were available for hire. But crossbows couldn't match longbow rate of fire. French armies in the 1350s and 1360s still relied on heavy cavalry and mercenary crossbowmen, and they kept losing. Only in the 1370s, when Du Guesclin shifted to guerrilla tactics and avoided pitched battles, did France start winning again. The economic cost of Crécy is hard to calculate. France lost 1,142 named nobles, many of them heads of great houses. Their deaths triggered inheritance disputes, power struggles, and economic disruption. Ransom payments from captured nobles enriched English knights and funded Edward's campaigns. The plunder from Normandy, Edward's chevauchés burned and looted for weeks before Crécy, devastated the French economy. Estimates suggest 20,000 to 30,000 French civilians died in the raids, and towns like Caen lost a quarter of their population. The battlefield casualties at Crécy were militarily significant, but the broader destruction was economically catastrophic. French succession law, the so-called Salic law, barred inheritance through the female line, but Edward ignored it. Crécy proved English superiority, validated Edward's claim, and justified the war. The 100 Years' War wasn't primarily about territory or trade, it was about legitimacy. Edward wanted to be recognized as King of France. He never achieved it, but Crécy bought him credibility in time. The longbow's mechanics are simple but brutal. Draw the string to the ear, full draw 28 to 32 inches depending on the archer's build. The draw weight, 100 to 150 pounds, is stored in the ewe-limbs, compressed at the belly, stretched at the back. Release. The string snaps forward, transfers energy to the arrow. A 150-pound bow releases roughly 100 to 120 joules of energy. A modern compound bow releases 80 to 100 joules. The arrow, half an ounce of ash and steel, accelerates to 180 to 200 feet per second, covers 200 yards in under 2 seconds. At impact, a bodkin point delivers that energy to a surface area the size of a pencil tip. Plate armor can deflect glancing hits, but a direct strike punches through mail, splits leather, drives into flesh. Against horses, unarmored except for a few plates on the chest, it's lethal. The logistics of Crécy are often overlooked. Transporting 8,000 men across the Channel required 750 ships. Feeding them in France meant foraging, plunder, and supply trains from England. Edward's army carried thousands of arrows. Some chronicles say 1.2 million, though that's probably inflated. Arrows were bundled in sheaves of 24, stored in wagons, distributed before battle. Each archer carried 2 sheaves, 48 arrows, enough for 4 to 5 minutes of sustained shooting. Resupply during battle meant runners carrying arrows from the wagons to the line. Some archers scavenged arrows from corpses. A bodkin point can be pulled, wiped, and reused if the shaft isn't broken. English longbowmen at Crécy likely reused French crossbow bolts when arrows ran low. Bolts are shorter, but can be shot from a longbow in a pinch. The Welsh spearmen, often ignored in retellings, played a crucial role. Armed with 12-foot spears and daggers, they guarded the flanks, finished wounded knights, and protected the archers from close assault. Welsh troops had fought against English longbows in the Welsh Wars of the 1280s. They knew the weapon's power and how to exploit its weaknesses. Get inside bow range, close fast, hit the archers before they can drop their bows and draw swords. At Crécy, the Welsh fought for England, paid in wages and plunder, and their anti-cavalry tactics, target the rider, hamstring the horse, swarm the downed knight, proved effective. Chronicles rarely name them, but English payrolls from the campaign list 1,000 Welsh infantry, paid 4 pence per day, same as archers. Milan-forged plate armor, breastplate, backplate, pauldrons, greaves, gauntlets, helmet with visor, covered the torso and limbs. Mail backed the joints. A full harness weighed 60 to 80 pounds, but distributed the weight across the body, allowing mobility on foot. Mounted, a knight could ride, couched lance, and strike with devastating force if he reached the target. At Crécy, most didn't. The combination of arrow fire, obstacles, mud, and slope stopped them short. Those who reached the English line fought dismounted, tired, outnumbered, and were cut down. But horses are prey animals. They shy from obstacles, avoid pain, panic under sustained attack. Arrow fire drives horses mad. Wounded horses bolt, throw riders, crash into other horses. Trained war horses are expensive. A destrier cost 50 to 100 gold écus, equivalent to a year's income for a knight, and losing one was a financial disaster. At Crécy, hundreds of destriers died on the slope, shot full of arrows and their bodies created further obstacles for following waves. Third, fourth, fifth charges. Smaller groups, nobles seeking glory, each lasting 10 to 20 minutes. By sunset, 16 separate assaults, each one broken. The English held position the entire time, rotating archers to the front as others resupplied or rested. Discipline. The French charged piecemeal, each division independent, no overall coordination. Chaos. Philip's retreat was organized by the Count of Hainault, who grabbed the king's reins and pulled him off the field. Philip's horse was killed under him. He mounted a spare, was hit in the face by an arrow. Glancing blow shattered his jaw but didn't kill him, and rode for Amiens, 20 miles east. He arrived after midnight, banged on the gates, was initially refused entry because the guards didn't recognize him in the dark. "Open! It is the fortune of France!" he allegedly shouted. The gates opened. He collapsed inside, was treated by physicians, and stayed in Amiens for weeks recovering. The French army scattered. No pursuit by the English. They camped on the field, tended their wounded, and looted the French dead. A full harness of Milan plate could be ransomed back to the family or sold to merchants. Armor fetched high prices. Gold spurs, rings, belt buckles. Anything valuable was taken. Lower-ranked French dead were stripped of mail and weapons. Horses were rounded up, valuable ones kept, others killed for meat. Chronicles say the English army feasted on horse meat that night, and the fields stank of blood and shit. Wounded men lose control of bowels and bladders, and 10,000 corpses rot fast in August heat. By August 28th, the smell was overwhelming, and the army marched north, leaving the villagers of Crécy to bury the dead. In 1450, a century later, the Duke of Burgundy visited the site and commissioned a chapel to honor the dead. The chapel stood until the French Revolution, when it was torn down. In 1850, the rediscovery of bones and Alençon's sword renewed interest, but no excavation happened. In the 1950s, a local historian located 3 probable pits using oral history and soil discoloration. In the 1980s and 2000s, ground-penetrating radar confirmed them. They're still there. The campaign. Each point represents a shot, an archer, a moment of violence. Multiply by thousands and the scale becomes clear. The French fought bravely. 16 charges prove that. But bravery without tactics is suicide. Philip lost not because his knights were cowards, but because his plan was charge and win. Edward won because his plan was stand, shoot, and let them break themselves. Simple, effective, brutal. The 100 Years' War continued until 1453, with England ultimately losing, but Crécy set the pattern. English victories on the battlefield, French victories in the Long War. The longbow became obsolete, not because it failed, but because training longbowmen was unsustainable. Guns required less skill, less time, less physical investment. By 1600, the longbow was a relic, remembered in stories and ballads, and Crécy was the battle that proved its power and, eventually, its limits. In 2001, researchers using ground-penetrating radar mapped the largest of the burial pits, estimated 400 bodies, stacked 4 deep, covered with 6 feet of soil, located 150 meters downslope from where the English archers stood. The anomaly is clear on the scans, a rectangular depression, denser than surrounding soil, measuring roughly 15 meters by 10 meters. No dig permit was requested. The local mayor, citing respect for the dead and lack of funding, declined to pursue it. The pit sits under a wheat field, plowed every spring, harvested every summer, unmarked except in research archives. Beneath the topsoil, bones, mail fragments, rust, silence. 8,000? 12,000? Without excavation, we can't know. The French chronicles say many thousands. English chronicles say innumerable. Modern historians argue, split the difference, cite ranges. The truth is in the ground at Crécy, 6 feet down, and it's staying there.